Make him feel welcome. Hi everyone, I'm Jason Taylor. I'm a solution architect for Increment and a Microsoft MVP in developer technologies. For those of you who don't know about Increment, Increment is a technology services company that brings together highly skilled professionals from around Australia. At Increment, I help clients to design, develop, test and deploy custom solutions to the cloud. And if you'd like to learn more, you can jump online and check out increment.inc, or you can ask me some questions after this presentation. So it's great to be back here at the Brisbane.net user group. It's been 1 month for me. I try to get here most months, but I don't always make it. And I'm really excited to be sharing with you my new presentation, Unleashing Clean Architecture with .NET 8. This is a show and tell style presentation. I'll be demonstrating the Clean Architecture Solution template, which is an open source project that I maintain. And I will show you how to prepare your development environment, how to install the template, how to create a new solution, how to build, test, and deploy the solution to production. And then I'll tell you about some of the exciting features that are built into the template. These features are designed to help you get your next project up and running quickly and to improve your productivity as a developer so that you can focus on delivering value to your clients. Let's get started. So the Clean Architecture Solution template provides a straightforward and efficient approach to enterprise application development with clean architecture and ASP.NET Core. It's been built using the .NET templating engine, and so it's really easy to use. You can create a new solution using .NET New or even through Visual Studio 2022 by selecting the template. You can see there I've got a little kind of metric there. So far, since it was created in October of 2019, I've got 66,000 downloads. So I'm hoping to get that up to 100,000 at some point in the future. Thanks, Todd. So with this template, it started out on .NET 3.1, and I've upgraded it through 5, 6, 7, and most recently 8. And if you're going to be building a new solution, a new ASP.NET Core solution in the near future, you probably want to consider .NET 8 because it's the long-term support version. And I'd say in about 6 weeks, we'll get that first production-ready license with release candidate 1. All right, so with this .NET upgrade, it wasn't just about changing the SDK to .NET 8. I started to implement a lot of the features that people have been asking for many years. So traditionally, the template was just Angular and ASP.NET Core. Now it supports React and ASP.NET Core, and you also have a Web API only option. Database options, not just SQL Server, it also includes SQLite, and I'll be looking at adding PostgreSQL to this very soon. Security is now through ASP.NET Core Identity. One of the most asked for features was a simpler security system, so simpler authentication and authorization. I've always taken the lead from the ASP.NET Core team and how they built their SPA templates. And so traditionally this was with Identity Server. That's been taken out now. And so the SPA templates are using Identity Server with cookie-based authentication, and the API template is using, sorry, I said Identity Server, didn't I? ASP.NET Core Identity with cookie-based authentication, and the Web API template is Identity with token-based. I've also built a complete CI/CD pipeline with infrastructure as code based on Azure Bicep. And so that's all of these things are templated, and that means when you go .NET New, these things are produced based on the options that you've selected, and you'll have a custom CI/CD pipeline built on GitHub Actions with custom Bicep templates. So this is, of course, still freely available and open source on GitHub. If you like it, please give it a star. That really helps keep me motivated. And so you can find it at jasontaylordev/clean architecture. All right, so installing the template is very simple. I'm going to demonstrate this soon, but you get to see my nice animation where I install it. So this .NET New install clean.architecture.solution.template, that'll install the .NET 7 version, okay? Because we're currently running on a preview version of .NET 8, and so the preview version of the template as well. So we need to specify the version, and I'll show you how to do that soon. Once the template's installed, it's really easy to use. You can use it from the command line using .NET New, .NET New ca-sln. It's got a number of options, name and output, which come from the .NET New command, but also client framework. So as I said, you can choose between Angular or React, and if you specify none, it'll just be a web API only solution. You can also specify that you'd like to use SQLite instead of SQL Server. So I'll look at changing some options, adding some options there to support PostgreSQL. So when you do create a solution and you say specify, I want Angular and I want SQLite, the solution will produce exactly that. So it'll have an Angular front end with an ASP.NET Core backend, SQLite set up with Entity Framework Call with migrations already produced for SQLite. So it's ready to go. So that's an example of how you could create a React solution. So that'd be React front end with an ASP.NET Core backend. All right, if you're doing it through Visual Studio, it's even easier. Just find the Clean Architecture Solution template, click on it, and click Next, and choose your options through the IDE. I know sometimes that sort of stuff could be a little bit hard to see, so I might just zoom in a bit. Yeah, Todd?
And you don't have to install anything?
Yeah.
That option?
Yeah, you have to install the template.
Okay.
So this is like a nice option that you get when you install a .NET template through the command line. You can also see it in Visual Studio. It used to be a lot harder to see your templates in VS. All right, so let's start out with a demo. Let's deploy the solution to production. Obviously, we've got a little bit of work to do there, but it does take time to deploy to production, so I wanted to kind of kick that off really early. So we're going to set up our development environment. We will create a new solution, build tests, and run the solution locally, and then we'll deploy it to production. So let me just bring up my cheat sheet. Okay, so first thing we want to do is to make sure that we're running the latest version of .NET. So if I go .NET version, or we just go .NET list SDKs, we can see that the latest version I have is .NET 8 Preview 6, and that's fine. Now, I'm running on a Windows machine, so if I wanted to check to see if there was a new version available and install it, I could go Microsoft there it is, SDK preview. So I could actually go, and I'm not going to run any of these winget commands tonight, but it's really nice to be able to run these commands quickly and efficiently from the command line. Up the back, can you see this okay? It's pretty good? Yeah, okay, good. All right, so I have .NET installed. I'm also going to be using the GitHub CLI. So I could also install that. Let me grab it here. So GitHub CLI from the command line, we can get installed github.cli. It's a really cool tool. Okay, but I already have the GitHub CLI installed. So the next thing I want to do is make sure I'm running the latest version of the template. So as I said, it's .NET New, Clean Architecture Solution template, and then the version. So you can see here I've just used a wildcard. So 8.0.0- some preview version, whether it's a release candidate or a preview 6 or preview 7, it doesn't matter. So it's going to go in and install that. So it says 6.17 is already installed, and now it's going to install it again for me. So make sure I have the right version. So you can see this is the what's called a .NET project template. It's my Clean Architecture Solution template, and this is a .NET item template. And so the project template will create the solution, whereas the item template will scaffold some code within the solution. And I'll show you that later on, so it makes it easier to create new features within your application. So I've got the template installed. I want to make sure that I am authenticated with GitHub. So I'll just go git hub auth status, and it'll say, yep, we're good to go. And I also want to make sure, actually, no, that's all we need for right now. So let's use the GitHub CLI to create ourselves a new repository on GitHub. So we go GitHub, repo, create. We'll call this one briz.net. And so there's interactive way I can do it. If I just press enter there, it'll give us a bunch of questions and we can create that repository. But I'm just going to provide options for to make it public. Oh, is that already there? Yeah, okay, good. I will create a public repo and I will clone it. And so that means it's going to create the repo, it's going to clone it locally. I can jump straight into briz.net and we're ready to go with an empty repository. Now I've got the template installed, so I can go .net new CA solution, and if I wanted to learn more, I can go help. Okay, and so that's going to see some of the options that we saw in the previous slide. But basically, we're now going to create a new solution. So if I go .net new CA solution, I'll give you guys a choice. Do you want to do Angular or React tonight? React. Okay, and so we'll leave it with SQL Server and it's going to output into the current directory. So the .NET templating engine is going to look at the current directory and it's going to say, well, this directory is called briz.net. And so that means it's going to create a new solution called briz.net. And the namespaces inside it are going to be briz.net. So everywhere it finds clean architecture in this template, it's going to be replaced with briz.net. So that includes the CI/CD pipeline. It includes the bicep templates. It includes the source code. It includes readmes, all that sort of stuff. So we're good to go. So why don't I just get this committed? We won't push it yet because that will trigger the CI/CD pipeline when it's ready to go. And we'll go git commit new project like that. Okay. So I do want to show you how all of this works, but before I do that, I want to trigger the CI/CD pipeline so that I can get this deploying through to different environments. So to do that, I need to set up the GitHub repository. There's a few environments I need to create. There's some variables that I need to create. There's secrets that I need to create so that it can communicate with Azure. In Azure, there's resource groups that I need to create. There's app registrations that I need to create in Azure AD. And so there's a lot of work. So obviously, if we were starting a new solution, we had to do all of this from scratch, it would take a long time. But I don't want to do that. I want my solution templates, whether it's the Blazor one or this one, to be really quick to get up and running so that I can focus on delivering business value. Okay? And so I've put some scripts into this template now to do all of that for me. So this script will tell us exactly what it's going to do when we run it. Okay, so it says, this script automates the setup of environment, resources, credentials for a project hosted on GitHub and deployed to Azure. It creates workload identities in Azure AD, sets up resource groups and configures environment-specific variables and secrets in GitHub repository. The script leverages Azure CLI, the GitHub CLI, and GitHub APIs to perform these tasks. It aims to streamline the process of setting up and configuring development, staging, and production environments for the project. And this script does have parameters. It's a PowerShell script with parameters, but it's done its best to guess what they might be because we didn't provide anything. And that's where it's using the GitHub CLI and it's using the Azure CLI. So I need to look at this and make sure I'm happy with this. Is this the right subscription ID? And if I'm not happy with that, then I can go into the Azure CLI and I can change it. I can say AZ account set subscription. So all of this has been gathered for me. Now you can see in the environments, it's going to create a development environment, a staging environment, and a production environment. And then it's got a warning. It says running this script will perform various operations in your GitHub repository and Azure subscription, ensure that you have the necessary permissions and understand the consequences. So don't run this script without understanding exactly what it does. Okay? And in case you didn't see the warning, there's a disclaimer. Use the script at your own risk. The author and contributors are not responsible for loss of data or any unintended side effects resulting from running the script. So that being said, I will go ahead and run the script. The default option is no. All right, but I'm going to run it. So it's going to go away and it's going to set up a bunch of stuff for me. Now while it's doing that, I've got a browser handy. Let's see. Yep, I got one here, but that one is not going to be enough because I need to be signed into GitHub. So we'll bring this one over. I'll hide all my bookmarks, favorites, never. There we go. Okay, so we created a repo called briz.net, and we just have a couple of manual things we need to do so that this pipeline is going to be able to run. So the first thing is we need to give the workflows permissions to read and write the GitHub token. So that's used for authorization. Whoops. So we just set read and write there, and scrolling down, we hit save. Now, the script that's running in the background, it's finished now. The script that's running in the background created some environments for us in GitHub. So we have a development, production, and staging environment, and it's also created some secrets, the SQL admin password, and 3 variables. So one thing that I can do is I can come into an environment and specify a required reviewer. I'm not going to do that tonight because I always forget to approve it and then the pipeline never finishes. But I can come in here and I can say, yep, I want to be one of the required reviewers for this particular pipeline. If I scroll down to secrets and variables, we can get a bit of a glimpse at what's in here. So you can see for secrets, we have environment-specific secrets and variables now in GitHub Actions, which is really nice. So I've basically got the Azure SQL Administrator password for production, staging, and development. I don't know what that is. That was generated randomly by that script that we run, the setup.ps1 script. I don't need to know what it is because it's going to be passed through to the bicep templates, and it's going to end up in Key Vault as a connection string. So that's fine. Inside of the variables here, we've got the Azure Client ID, which is the app registration, which lives in Azure AD. And we also have the Azure Subscription ID, the tenant ID, and the project name. So this tenant ID, subscription ID, and the client ID are used for GitHub Actions to authenticate against Azure using that app registration. Project name's pretty obvious. Here we have the default username for the SQL administrator, and we've got our resource group names. So all of this is, of course, being created automatically for us, and if we go into the Azure portal, we can see some of the things that have been created in there. And the focus of this talk is not to teach you how to do all of this. It's to show that when you focus on your specialization and you put together the right tools, technologies, and approach, you can deploy to production really quickly and focus on delivering business value. We're basically establishing a pipeline of value on day 0. Okay, and so this is my specialization. This is the way I'd like to do it. But you might be able to learn from this and fork it or create your own or do something completely different. So you can see here the resource groups are all there. I'll zoom that in to 150%. So there's our briz.net resource groups. And if we went over to, they're empty at the moment. If we went over to Azure Active Directory, I need a bit more space for that, and go into app registrations, we got a glimpse of them, but then they disappeared. We've got these app registrations representing the application running in different environments, and associated with that are some credentials. So one for an environment specific. These are used by GitHub Actions to authenticate against Azure. One that's not environment specific, and one that is environment specific. Okay, so with that in place, and the pipeline set up, and the workflow with the right permissions, all I have to do now is go git push. Okay, normally, of course, we're going to create a feature branch, do a pull request, all that sort of thing, get it approved and that sort of thing. We don't have time. It's Thursday night, and really we want to get some beers soon, so we're going to skip that. So come back over here to briz.net and go into actions, and we can see the pipeline has kicked off. And I'm going to walk you through exactly what each step of the pipeline does. But essentially, it's going to build the project, test the project, package the project, deploy it to development, staging, and production, and make sure that the database, which will also be provisioned, is actually up to date and running the latest migrations, whatever that might be in our solution. Okay, so while that's happening, let's go into this one. I'll drop back into briz.net, and I just want to give you a quick peek at the solution. So we'll go. So the first thing you need to know is don't do what I just did and load up Visual Studio 2022. We've got to load up the preview version because some of the earlier versions of .NET 8 preview worked in Visual Studio 2022, but there's been some issues recently that I've run into. So just use the preview version. I changed that theme this afternoon to do a screenshot. It looks so old. I'll leave it like that for now though. So if I go File, Start Window, Clean Architecture, and we'll zoom in. Okay. So out of the box, you get your 4 layers. So web being presentation, domain and application layers representing core, and infrastructure, all of your external concerns such as data access. You also get a bunch of test projects. So for domain and application, there's some unit test projects, but there's also some functional test projects, which will exercise they're basically system tests. So you can run those against a live database with live services. For web, we have acceptance tests. So those acceptance tests are running Playwright and SpecFlow. And we also have an empty project at the moment for infrastructure, which is the integration tests. So you get this out of the box. Something cool that I added recently, which I kind of like, is I've also added a default README. It's not that one. Oh, sorry, I didn't load the briz.net project. This is the actual the clean architecture solution template. We need to load the briz.net one, because when it's generated through the .NET templating engine, it's quite different. So here's our README for our briz.net project. So it generated a starter README, which is going to be great because you always need a README so that everybody on the development team's on the same page about how to build, run, test, and basically deploy the solution. So that comes out of the box. You can see there's an editor config so that there's consistent code styles and formatting. A lot of this I'll cover later on in the talk. So I think you can see the classic structure is still in place, and that'll help you get up and running really quickly. So if I come back over to here, let's do a quick build. So .NET build TL. Has anyone seen this command? It's really cool. So I can't remember. Oh yeah, terminal build output. So .NET build has a new option in .NET 8 to produce more modernized output. So the terminal logger output groups errors with the project that they came from, and it better differentiates the different target frameworks for multi-targeted projects and provides real-time information on what the build is doing, which is pretty cool if you like to work in the command line. Now on this side over here, I'm going to just get a few things ready. CD source, CD web, and we'll go .NET run. So we'll just launch the web project. And over here, we'll get ready to run our tests. So there we go, .NET test, no build. Okay, so this is going to run all tests in the solution. So it'll run our unit tests, it'll run our integration tests, our functional tests, and our acceptance tests. Let's just see that it started okay. Where did that land? Not there. This one, that should do it. Here we go. So that's our React application. Of course, we could go and sign in and all that sort of thing, but I really just want to run the tests at this stage. There we go. So give that a second. All right. That always gets me, but that's okay. That's just because I'm not running Docker. So at the moment, the functional tests can run in 3 different ways. If you chose SQLite, they'll run against the local SQLite database. If you chose SQL Server, they're going to run by default against test containers. So SQL Server in Docker, and that'll get spun up automatically for you, and it'll get cleaned up afterwards for you. The third way that you can run it is it can point at an actual SQL Server on your development machine. And that third way is my preference for SQL Server, because the fact of the matter is that container, whether that real live SQL Server, whether it's in a container or not, is already running, is already ready to go. And so when I run my functional tests against that, I don't have to wait for the container to be spun up and then the test to run and the container to be removed. It's already ready to go. So it's just a little bit faster, about 9 or 10 seconds faster, not that I did any serious benchmarking on it. So we'll go ahead and run that again. And so you can see that when you use a template like this, there might be a lot that you're not familiar with. There might be a lot that you haven't seen before, or maybe this is all normal for you. But you can come into this template and you can see how it works. It's already working all the way through to production, and you can ask questions on the GitHub repository and have discussions with other users. So there we go. I think all of those tests passed, so that's good. And that's really what I wanted to demonstrate as part of that demo. And it looks like everything's coming along nicely here. So it's just started its deployment to development. And deployment to development will include things like deploying the infrastructure, initializing the database, and actually deploying the website. So we'll get to see that once it's finished. All right. Yes, question? When I'm running SQLite, do I run against files or in memory? That's a good question. So when the web application runs, it's running against files, but when the functional tests run, it's running in memory.
And the second one, you said it deploys automatically to the staging info.
Yes.
So you don't deploy to dev and then remove them. So usually you deploy to dev and then try out goes to staging and then straight
Yes.
to go.
So
it's doing it all at the same time?
it is, yes, but only because I haven't configured the pipeline to do an approval. So generally what I will do is set up an approval for the staging environment and the production environment, and so it won't go through automatically unless there's an approval. But there is still just one single build artifact for the website that gets promoted from development to staging and then to production. So it's the same artifact that will move through the pipeline. Any other questions?
Is this question time? Because I've got questions.
Yeah.
All right. So what license is the template released under? And
I should repeat the question. So the question was, what license is the template released under? It's MIT.
And that's the most permissive, I think, of them. Just out of interest, with templates like this, does the license of the template code apply to the code generated by the template?
Yes, I believe that's specified in the license.
Okay, cool. May I ask another?
Yes.
Oh yeah, so you did a few manual GitHub steps.
Yes. Really just one.
Yeah, it was the security token thing. Is it the reason that manual because you can't automate it through the CLI?
Correct. So the question was, I did a manual step when configuring the GitHub repo, which was to enable read and write access to the workflow for the GitHub token. And yeah, I haven't found a way to do that either through the CLI, the GitHub CLI, or through the GitHub API. So if someone does know a way to do that, I'd appreciate a heads up.
Cool. I think those are probably the ones I wanted to go with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so now I get to show you some of the things that I found exciting, I think you might find exciting that came through in this upgrade. So the first thing that I found exciting was framework and package management. So I've simplified managing target framework and dependencies of projects across the solution. So the required .NET SDK version is specified in global.json. Now, admittedly, I know that that's not very exciting, but it's important to remember that although generally speaking, global.json is optional because you can always run on the latest SDK, for this particular solution, it's used in the pipeline to make sure that the correct SDK is installed on the build agent. So we do need global.json in this case, unless we were to go and change the pipeline. The other thing that's a bit exciting is the required .NET runtime version is specified just once in directory build.props. So directory build.props has some common properties, and that will get applied to all, 8 projects that are in the solution. So if I want to change in the future from net 8 to net 9, I just change that in one place plus global.json. You can see there's some other common properties there. Treat warnings as errors so that people can't check in code with warnings, because that's really annoying. You don't have to have that conversation anymore. implicit usings and nullable just across the board. All right, so package versions are managed centrally in directory packages.props. So I've enabled the central package management feature, which came out sometime last year. And all we have to do is have this directory packages.props file, set manage package version centrally to true, and then all of the different packages that we have, we list in this file with the appropriate version. And so that means if I wanted to upgrade NUnit across 4 different testing projects, I just change the version here. And I don't have to change it inside of the individual project files. Yes, question?
Oh, okay. Does that mean that it will be built with your deployed, like your main application, or is it limited just being brought into
So it kind of really doesn't work any differently. So once you have directory.packages.props, you list the versions, you list all of the package and all of the versions that you want, but then your CS proj just lists the package. So this is the project specific one. So it lists it without the version. So it's nice and simple. Yeah. Yeah. So let's think about the next, so if we go back a little bit here, if we think about when I upgrade to .NET Preview 7, I only have to change 2 files, global.json and directory.packages.props. I don't have to change 8 different projects. So I thought that was really exciting. I really like that. So there's a combination of features there. Yes?
Is this managed central thing, does it only work with the NuGet packages, or like let's say we have got our own custom
Yeah.
registry?
Yeah, the question was, does this, what is it called again? Central package management? Yeah, central package management. Does it only work with NuGet, or does it work with other repositories? I believe that it only works with NuGet because I believe it's actually a feature of NuGet that's exposed and available. So, all right, dependency injection. So dependency injection in the template supported using the built-in .NET dependency injection container. That's nice and simple, but I like to split it out with project service dependencies registered in a dependency injection.cs file. So the way that works, of course, is I create an extension method on iService collection. So in this case, we're doing it for our infrastructure project. So I have a dependency injection file in the root of the infrastructure project, an extension method called add infrastructure services. And inside of this method, I'll wire up all of the services that are related to infrastructure. And then in the composition root, which is generally program.cs, I will just go ahead and call all of those extension methods. And because I've built it as kind of a little Fluent API, I can just say add this, and then we're done. And that keeps program.cs really clean, right? So I've even got one there for the web project there. So that's sitting in the same project, but nice and clean.
when you compare that against like a standard sort of registration modules, like you might find in AutoFac,
Yeah.
what do you think the advantage of this approach is?
Well, for me, it's just that I get to use the simplest approach. And the simplest approach is not always the best approach, but it's kind of one of the goals of the template. The goal is the simplest approach to enterprise application architecture with ASP.NET Core. And so if I bring in too many other packages like, say, AutoFac or fast endpoints.
Not so much bringing in the package, just the
Yeah.
pattern of using like a module.
Well, this is,
Abstraction of the module
I mean,
rather than
yeah.
extension.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I guess essentially for me, it's the same end result. I have a nice, clean, tidy place where I can define my dependencies, and it keeps my composition root looking very clean. Another question?
So how does that work? And I guess your different layers, layered projects would need to like depend on some dependency injection package.
Correct.
Do you find that still worth it versus having your main composition group have to know all of the abstractions and implementations in the different layers?
So the question was, so to have that work, the various projects would need to depend on some kind of dependency, say the Microsoft dependency injection abstractions project, and is it what was the second part to it? Sorry.
Yeah. So is it worth it? Because obviously, like the domain layer,
Yeah.
ideally doesn't depend on anything.
Right.
On there.
Yeah.
But the trade-off is,
Yeah.
I guess that domain layer now can kind of hide a bit of detail. Right?
Yes.
It says, hey, here's the abstractions you care about.
Yes.
I'm going to tell you if
Yeah. So in taking this approach, then there might be a dependency, say, on the domain layer for certain packages that probably shouldn't be there. And so with clean architecture, the goal has always been to be independent of anything external. So it's independent of the UI, independent of the database, independent of frameworks, and that sort of thing. So if we take a really pure approach to clean architecture, then yeah, we probably want to avoid that. In this case, there's no dependencies being wired up in domain. So that particular issue is not a problem, but there is an application and infrastructure and web. So I don't mind. I always tend to take a bit of a pragmatic approach to clean architecture. And so if you look at my application layer, I've got a dependency on Entity Framework Core. I don't have a dependency on a specific database, but there is a dependency on Entity Framework Core and a few other things. I'm trying to zoom in there. And that's because I feel that the value proposition by not being dependent on an ORM is not worthwhile to me. I don't tend to change an ORM. It doesn't mean that I'm not ever going to implement a repository pattern or a unit of work. I might. I just have to figure out what problem that's going to solve. So yes, clean architecture, being very pure and adhering strictly to the principles is one thing, but I tend to take a pragmatic approach. So there will generally be a compromise, and the question as to whether you should do one thing over another will always be it depends.
Yeah, I like it because there's often details that I find I'm leaving out of a project just because the composition group needs to know both the abstraction and the
Yeah. Okay.
I've got an opinion there.
Yes.
I think at the moment you quite often see
You promised
abstractions.
that you would walk out if I showed you something dirty in my clean architecture implementation.
But you see with dependency injection now, they've got dependency injection abstractions as
Yes.
interfaces definition.
Yeah.
And then the implementation. So if you really don't want to take a dependency implementation,
Yeah.
you can take the abstractions interface. I think Entity Framework Core would really benefit from having that abstractions interface and saying, yeah, if we're using Entity Framework, here's the abstractions that Entity
Yes.
Framework uses. Feel free to rewrite it, you won't.
Yes.
Because it's big.
Yes.
But having that would just solve a few arguments, I think, in that space.
I agree. And so
Yeah, ITV set everything, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's all you need.
so Brendan
Feed it to link.
Brendan was sharing his opinion on the use of abstractions, such as dependency injection extractions. Actually, I was looking in the CS proj to see where I'd referenced that. I'm sure I'd referenced it in the past in certain projects in order to extend iService collection, but I couldn't quite. And he raised a very good point that it would be good if Entity Framework Core had some extractions, so you'd be taking dependency on the abstraction instead of the actual framework. But you know what? I think that's the thing about Entity Framework Core. It is one big abstraction. It's an abstraction on the database. So I can, even though I have a dependency on Entity Framework Core in the application layer, I can switch to SQLite. I can switch to SQL Server. I've already proven that. I can switch to PostgreSQL. Any of the databases that are provided by Entity Framework Core, I can switch. So I get to use the ORM directly, and I don't have to jump through too many hoops to leverage its powerful capabilities.
Kinds of abstraction. Are there
Different.
Argument all code is abstractions.
Yep. Well, maybe. No problem. All right, so next, Web API. So it includes a API built using ASP.NET Core Minimal API. Now I've built in some Minimal API extension methods which support some defaults such as Open API and some routing conventions, because Minimal API is fast and lightweight, but a lot of the things that we know and love, such as conventions, are just not built into the framework at the moment. Now, of course, I could have gone on and chosen something like fast endpoints, but I really wanted to keep it simple. And for me, keeping it simple was using ASP.NET Core Minimal API and seeing if I could get it to work in a way that I really liked. Now, we have a lot of options for how we organize our API endpoints, right? We've all seen the demo where we have a tiny web API with one file and all of the endpoints are defined in that file. And I think that that option is okay, right? If you have a very small service with a small number of endpoints and minimal logic in those endpoints, right? For a CRUD application with maybe only one or two entities. The other option that we've seen is we can group endpoints into separate files, such as this one, get weather forecast. So this is a good option for where perhaps we're building an enterprise API and there's quite a lot of logic in each endpoint. We can kind of start to separate each endpoint into its own file, perhaps into its own folder, and in that folder we can have the endpoint, we can have the request type, the response type. We'll have this nice little slice for that particular endpoint, and we can go to that folder and work on that endpoint. The other option is we could group related endpoints into a single file, such as users.cs. So all of the endpoints that are related to users will sit inside of this file. And I think that's a good option, again, for an enterprise API where there are a lot of endpoints to manage, but the endpoints themselves don't contain very much logic. Now, those are the type of endpoints that I have in the Clean Architecture Solution template, because my endpoints are only concerned with figuring out what type of request it is and passing it on to some handler which lives in the application layer. So my endpoints are quite small. So let me show you what it looks like. Groups of endpoints are defined in separate files. So I created an abstract base class called endpoint group base, which defines a map method. Okay, so this map method accepts as a parameter the web application, and it calls map group. Now, Minimal API has a map group, but this one's actually an extension method that I built and allows me to pass in this class, an instance of weather forecast. I use that information to set up some defaults, such as the group name is called weather forecast based after the class name. I use it to specify tags so that the OpenAPI specification generates correctly. I use it to specify that we do want to add OpenAPI. So all of these defaults are built into my extension method. And this map get, well, of course, Minimal API has a map get, but again, this is one of my extension methods. I'm passing in the method that you see below, which contains all of the logic for getting weather forecasts. And do you see what I mean when I say my endpoints don't have much logic in them? They're usually just one or two lines of code. So grouping a set of related endpoints into a single file works really well for me. So we've got the endpoint group base, we've got the map group, which is an extension method, and map get, which is an extension method. And of course, there's a whole host of other extension methods to support put, post, delete, and different combinations of that. So the endpoint groups are automatically registered. You don't have to register them one at a time. I've just created an extension method on web application. You just say map endpoints. It will look for all the endpoint group bases and just call map for you. So essentially wires it up. And that's been working really well for me. I've got an example of another endpoint group later on, and I'll show you why I think it's working well. Oh yes, one of the other things that we've got in .NET 8 is the new exception handler. So this works with the unhandled exception middleware, and essentially it allows you to improve your exception handling with exception handler, which gives you a callback for handling known exceptions in a central location. So you can see in this case, I've got a custom exception handler implementing exception handler, and we've got this try handle async method. And so inside of here, we can create some logic to handle known exception types. And if we were able to handle it, we can return true, otherwise false. Now in the template, when you look at it, I have a list of known exceptions that I will try to handle, and I will craft a more appropriate response. But with this approach, it kind of made me think, well, I don't have to just have one exception handler. I can have multiple. So you could actually say, this is the not found exception handler, this is the validation exception handler, whatever common case it is that you have that you'd like to manage. And you can see there that I've got services.add exception handler, custom exception handler. So if you had many, obviously you'd probably create an extension method on that to wire them up automatically. Yes, question?
iException handler, does that replace the old filter stuff?
Does iException handler replace the old exception filters?
Yeah.
No. So it's an alternate option. So this one is working through middleware, so a little bit more global. The filters are still available, and you can manage exception handling through the filters. I like this approach because I don't have to specify on each of my endpoints, add this filter. Admittedly, of course, with the solution that I've built, it would be very easy to do so because I would just do it as one of the options when I call my map group extension method. But yeah. Yes, question?
Do you still need a try catch to call it?
No, this happens as a...
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. So the question was, do you need a try catch to call it? No, this happens as a result of the exception, and it's automatically, so ASP.NET Core, the middleware which is dealing with these exceptions, will call this filter, and if it's able to kind of handle it, if it returns true, then that'll be the end of processing. But if it can't, it'll see if you've got some other exception handlers and it'll try them too. Otherwise, it'll fall back to its default response, so you'll get your 500. Okay, OpenAPI. So, of course, the template includes OpenAPI support to improve productivity and easily adapt to API changes. It generates an OpenAPI specification based on the included web API, and it does that whenever the web project builds. So you know your specification will always be up to date. Developers can, of course, use Swagger UI to visualize and interact with the endpoints. Now, it also generates an Angular or React TypeScript client based on the web API. Thank you. The Angular client is just as it always been, but the React TypeScript client needed a little bit of customization. So I'm using NSwag to generate these clients. The React client has a custom template which will handle the new ASP.NET Core identity authentication correctly. So if it returns a redirect to login, that'll be handled automatically. And so that works both for Angular and React. So this is really cool. This is one of the really great productivity things. When you're building your Angular or React front end, you don't have to manually write HTTP client code to interact with your API. You have strongly typed interfaces and types, and also strongly typed response and request types. So I've also included a web.http file if you prefer to use that. And so if you haven't seen this, this gives you a way that a little bit of a playground where you can interact with your API. And it might be a little bit hard to see up the back there, but in this particular one, I'm demonstrating some of the capabilities of the new ASP.NET Core Identity API, which I haven't talked about yet. We'll get to. All right. Authentication and authorization is the next topic. So as with the official .NET 8 SPA templates, I've migrated these ones over to ASP.NET Core Identity. I mentioned that Angular and React SPAs will use the default ASP.NET Core Identity UI with cookie-based authentication. And so that means you get all of those Razor pages for free, and you don't have to build, say, login and register and profile and email, all those sorts of things. You can, of course, customize them. But if you don't want to kind of mix those things together, you can now use the ASP.NET Core Identity API. And so here, I think I've got a highlight there, yeah. Here, I'm adding the Identity API to this Web API solution. And it'll provide you some endpoints you'll see in a moment, register, login, refresh, that you can use. So if you wanted to, you could actually write your own UI in Angular and React to manage login and register and all those sort of identity concerns and communicate with this backend API. Now, I really like this. I talked to Brendan about this one day, and we were on a run, and I said, I think I've done a good job with the minimal API implementation with the extension methods, because when this map identity API became available, it just seemed to fit really well into my implementation. I created a new class called users. It's inheriting or based on the endpoint group base. The map method maps the group. So we get all the defaults like /API users, for the base route. And all I had to do, because it was an extension method, was call the built-in method.mapIdentity API. And it looked really simple to me. Yeah, I was happy with that result. So I think I've taken the right direction. All right, so this is an example of the endpoints that you would get. So obviously they're going, because it's part of the minimal API, they'll go ahead and make their way into the specification, and if you have it so configured, also into your Angular and React TypeScript clients. By default, it's not configured to use Identity API, but it's just a matter of adding that that endpoint group base. All right, data access. Data access this is a little bit boring, this slide. I'm going to work on this one a little bit, so just bear with me. So data access is supported using Entity Framework Core, either SQLite or SQL Server. Those are the built-in options. Of course, if you wanted to change to something else like PostgreSQL today, you just go ahead and delete the built-in migrations and change the provider, and you're pretty much there. You'll have to update the infrastructure as code as well. So the EF Core migrations is enabled, and it's almost completely automated. You have to still create your own migrations, but the rest of it is done for you. For example, database initialization and seeding, which means creating the database, applying the migrations, and seeding the database, occurs during startup for development environments. So your local development environment, you don't have to worry about it. For the deployed environments, it's using the Entity Framework Core Migrations Bundle, and that's a cross-platform app which will ensure that your deployed database, as configured using a connection string, is up to date with the latest migration. So we build this EF Core Migrations Bundle in the pipeline, and we run it in the pipeline for each environment. So where we need to configure our entities, where we're not happy with the conventions, we want to override them, the preference is to use EF Core Fluent API, and so you'll see some examples of that in there. And I also have some EF Core interceptors to implement cross-cutting concerns such as auditable entities and dispatching domain events. I'd love to show you just how clean that is, because that's something that I was really excited about. If you've worked with interceptors before, you might agree with me in saying that it's not really very nice to wire them up. Like, a lot of people will inject them in through the constructor, and then on configuring, register them. Well, I don't have a constructor. Well, no, I do have a constructor. I lied, sorry. My apologies. I do have a constructor, but it's not doing that. And I don't have on configuring. So my app.db context is nice and empty, but I'm still wiring up those interceptors. So let me show you how I did it. So I can't see that dependency inject, that's the one. So you can see here, I just register the interceptors with dependency injection, and then when I add my DB context, I'm just telling it, hey, just add all of the interceptors. Use the service provider, get the services, anything that's implementing I save changes interceptor, and add it in. So we can configure it here rather than in the app.db context, and that's much cleaner. I like that. All right. Core features. So core, being application layer and domain layer, has a number of features built into it, such as automatic validation of invoked use cases. Now, example of a use case might be create a customer or dispatch an order, and those are the types of things that live in the application layer. We also have the ability to specify authorize requirements for use case. So if we have specific authorization requirements for a use case, we can add an authorize attribute to that use case and specify those requirements. Now, you might be a little bit worried there that that's kind of got a dependency on some kind of identity tooling. It doesn't. It's an abstraction. I created the authorize attribute, and the process to run it is relying completely on some implementation sitting in infrastructure, which in this case is ASP.NET Core Identity, but yeah. We automatically log unhandled exceptions. This is some of these features. The first one, this is the second one and third one. These are powered by mediator pipeline behaviors. So if you haven't seen that sort of thing, I'd encourage you to check it out. I automatically log the details of any invoked use case. So when a request is made to the system, such as dispatching an order, I will log that request. I will log the input to that request, and I will log the user who, yes, question. Not at this stage. Yeah, that's something. I've got a massive backlog, and yeah, there's a lot of things that I want to add to it. But listen, that's a good question. So the question was, are you using open telemetry? And my answer, of course, was not at this stage, something that I want to look into. If you do like to contribute to the template at any point, I love contributions. Just keep in mind that the goal of the template is always the simplest approach to enterprise architecture with ASP.NET Core. So I might not add in advanced caching capabilities, but I might improve how logging is done. Simple things. Add and dispatch domain events is built in, support for value objects is built in, and support for auditable entities is built in. CI/CD pipeline, this was something that I worked very hard on. So this is the CI/CD pipeline. As I mentioned, it's based on GitHub Actions, and it deploys to Azure and manages the infrastructure using bicep templates. So when a developer does the right thing and raises a pull request and that gets reviewed and approved and merged into main, that'll kick off the CI pipeline. And that will build, test, and package the solution. When it packages the solution, it's building the Entity Framework Core Migrations Bundle and the website, the publish output of the website. We'll then kick off the CI pipeline. For each environment that's configured, it will deploy the infrastructure using Azure, and it will initialize the database using the Entity Framework Core migrations. And that's really good, right? Because this is a step on the deployment pipeline. If the database fails to initialize, you'll know about it. Much better than initializing it at startup when the application has been deployed already and users are using it but can't access their records. So it's part of the pipeline. It'll fail much faster. And then, of course, we deploy the website. So that's development, staging, and production. All right, infrastructure as code. So the template includes infrastructure as code using bicep templates. It includes the components necessary to support a basic web app. And that basic web app, the infrastructure design, is based on the Azure reference architecture for a basic web app. So you can see the link there if you'd like to learn more about that architecture. So I always like to align what I'm doing with something that's backed by a proven approach. So if you'd like to learn more about this, you can jump on Microsoft Learn and check that out. All right, code scaffolding. So it includes built-in support for scaffolding new use cases as either a command or query, because the template implements CQRS. So use cases represent specific application logic, such as create customer or dispatch order. And when you use this CA use case template, you'll want to use it within source application. That's where it's been designed to create these use cases. So essentially you'll go .NET new use case, you specify some options. The name represents the name of the use case being created. Feature name represents the feature that this use case belongs to. Use case type, either a command or query, and the return type, the name of the type being returned. That can be whatever you want it to be. Maybe you haven't created it yet. This is a demonstration of creating the dispatch orders use case. So we go .NET new, CA use case, feature name orders, name of the use case dispatch order, and the use case type is command. So it occurs to me that I don't have an example of the code that generates, so I'll just do that now for you quickly. So we want to jump into source and into web. Sorry, not into web, into application. I'll follow my instructions. Go .NET new CA use case. Thank you. I was wondering where my IntelliSense was. .NET. There we go. I don't want help. I want... There we go. That'll do. So we'll create a new use case in the feature called weather forecasts. And the use case name will be get today's forecast. And the return type will be a type that doesn't exist yet. It'll be the today's forecast VM. So if I press enter on that, there we go. It fails. Okay. Look, this is one that I tried earlier that didn't work because I specified all the wrong things. But I can fix it. Okay. Missing use case type, we can cover that too. That's UT, and this is a query. Boom, got it. Okay. So if we come into here and into application, I'm going to zoom this in for you. Okay. So I've got weather forecast folder. if that folder didn't already exist, that's the feature folder, it would have created it. Inside of that, there's a queries folder. So I separate the queries into the queries folder and the commands into the commands folder. It would have created that too. Here is my get today's forecast feature. And here is the, feature use case. And here is the code that it's generated. So this is just to help us get started. There we go. So I have a query, which is the input for the query. We could put some parameters in there. You know, we might want today's forecast with specific data return. We can define that. We've got a validator. So this is fluent validation. We can specify some validation on this input. And we have a handler. And you can see it's just gone and basically created a skeleton for us to start working with. So we don't have to go and create this folder structure and these files and that sort of thing. So I'd be interested in everyone's feedback on that if they do start using it. What else do you want to see? What options do you want? Should I include mapping? Should I make it optional? Whatever you need, we can build on it because it's pretty easy to create these item templates. All right, documentation. As mentioned, it includes a readme.markdown file, which is generated automatically. And the file content is based on the type of solution that you create. So the README will change depending on whether it's React or Angular or a web API. It includes basic details such as the template version used to create the solution, so that you know if you decide to upgrade to a new version of the Clean Architecture Solution template, you can kind of compare those versions. It includes how to build and run the app, code scaffolding to generate use cases, details on code styles and formatting, which is basically use editor config, running automated tests, and where to find help and other resources. All right, we just need to check our production deployment, make sure that that was successful. It's over here somewhere, isn't it? There we go. So is this the right one? Yeah, no, that's right. Okay, so that was our deployed to development. You can see staging and production went through. We'll just click on one of those sites just to see that it's running. So this will be the first time that's run. So of course, it's deployed all of the infrastructure, it's initialized the database, website's up and running, it's all wired into application insights. So there's telemetry coming from like Key Vault and from SQL Server, the actual logical server and the database itself. So that's all up and running. Oh, always through the project. Yay! Thank you. So we won't check the other environments because you can only see so much Hello World. All right, so I hope you enjoyed my talk tonight. If you're keen to learn more or hopefully contribute to the template, you can access the project on GitHub. There you can have a discussion with other users, you can request a new feature, you can point out a bug for me. I'm on top of it at the moment, so there's not any pull requests waiting to be merged, or there's not really any issues that I'm worried about. There's just a few there. So if you do put something through, it's likely that I'm going to respond very quickly. If you do find the template valuable, please give it a star on GitHub. That's what I thrive on at the moment, is GitHub stars. So I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.